My name is Dan Dorval, and I'm President and CEO of Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. I am an independent certified financial planner and author of my book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us, Reality Based Financial Planning for Mainstream America.
Hi, my name is Leah Woodley. I'm an associate financial advisor with Dorval and Cherney Financial Advisors. Our conversations discuss what it means to do quality of life planning in all areas of your life.
So, Dan, we are going through your book, Financial Success for the Rest of Us. And today I would like to talk about emergency reserves. This is something that is applicable to everyone, regardless of income, regardless of where they are in life. Everyone needs to have emergency reserves. So, why don't you tell us about the importance of that and what that can do for your financial situation?
Well, as we work our way through the hierarchy of cash flow and we get to this level of this idea of having financial security, having cash, we love cash. I mean, cash is a beautiful thing. If anybody's ever gone through a difficult time in their life, whether that is, your car broke down, something has happened to your house, you have an appliance breakdown, whatever it happens to be, we go through these things and they add stresses to our life. And if we have an emergency reserve in place, which of course is exactly what it's for. If I have an emergency, I have an emergency reserve to help me get through that difficult time. People who get laid off, if they get laid off, imagine how emotional that is to them. They just lost their job. I mean,
Mhm.
it is a big shock to your life. Now you start thinking in terms of, well, what am I going to do? So you start looking for work, right? And in today's world, maybe that's easy, maybe that's not easy. It depends on everybody out there. So you start to imagine, well, what if I can't work for a month? What if I can't
Mhm.
work for 3 months or I get a new job and it takes a little while before I get my first paycheck? If you have cash, you now look at it and you go, okay, maybe I don't want to use my cash, but at least I have it. And so
Mhm.
now that part of your life has some sense of stability, some sense of security. So while you're going through this major change that might make you feel like you're out of control, having that money allows you to move forward because you just say, okay, my car broke down. I got to make this repair. It cost me thousands of dollars, but at least I have it, and now I can turn around, pay for that thing, move on. That thing is in the past. And now I can work on saving my emergency reserve and getting it back up to what it was before.
Right. And I know in the book you mentioned the emotional toll that, relying on a credit card and having to pay that bill every month, it just is a constant reminder of whatever trauma you went through that caused the bill in the first place. So I know you were giving the example if you lost your job and then you had to put things on a credit card. It's just a constant emotional reminder of you being laid off. So it's good to just get those things out the way and be able to rely on yourself for that. Now, you talk about that concept of being your own bank. Tell me about that.
So being your own bank means, we're all going to use credit cards for different things. If you
Mhm.
book a flight, if you book a hotel or whatever it happens to be, it is completely okay to use credit cards. I'm not one of these people who says, go and cut up all your credit cards. That's just not realistic in today's modern world. But if you're going to use credit in some way, just imagining, we have clients who come in and they'll have money in savings, and then they'll put let's say a trip on their credit card. And let's say it's $5,000. And they go, oh my goodness, if I have to pay this entire bill right now, my savings might go from 10,000 down to 5,000. They don't want to do that. Human beings just don't want to use their savings. They don't want to feel like they're going backwards. But for some reason, having a credit card for a lot of people, that's a completely okay thing because they'll just make payments. And we're
Mhm.
conditioned to make payments. And now we'll look at that and we'll go, okay, you're paying 15, 20, 25% interest on this. And if it took you a year to pay that off, you might pay $1,000 in extra interest on that trip. And your $5,000 trip became a $6,000 trip. Now, if you have cash, instead of you paying that $1,000 to a bank or a financial institution, and in order for their CEO to get another Mercedes or whatever it happens to be, well, what if you just paid cash for that? So you saved the money ahead of time for the trip. You now put it on the credit card. The credit card bill comes due. You pay the entire $5,000, which can be very empowering to feel like you can actually do that. And
Hmm.
now, instead of making that payment back to the credit card over the next year, pay yourself back over the next year. And it's not so much that you're going to earn a bunch of interest on that money. It's the fact you're not going to pay a bunch of interest on that money. So being your own bank, if you think that bank executives are making a lot of money on the backs of the people who have these credit cards or whatever loans that they have, if they're going to make a lot of money and you now choose not to give them your money, you get to
Hmm.
keep that. And that is a positive thing where now that extra thousand of interest that I paid, I can use that for something that brings me quality of life.
It is absolutely empowering to be able to do so. So, yes, you are absolutely right. One thing, what do you say to the person who says, yeah, right, it's easy for you to talk about having an emergency reserve, but I have bills to pay and things are tight, and any money that I've had in savings seems to be gone by the end of the month. What do you say to that person?
Well, this goes along those lines that the world obviously is filled with ways we can spend money. I mean, we have endless ways in today's world to spend money. You can go online anytime you want and buy anything you want. So it is especially challenging for people to really focus on quality of life and say, okay, these are my values, my priorities, my motivations. And it is never our job to tell them how to spend their money or how to save their money. It's their role of looking at what, does this actually matter to me? And so when they say, there's just no way that I can live within my means, well, if the, we're not going to change that perspective without them having this intentional review of, okay, where is my money going?
Hmm.
Am I just randomly, you know, dripping, losing money through the system? Like it's just kind of filtering away and it's not adding to my quality of life. Maybe that's stopping for fast food just because it was convenient or it sounded good at the time, or whether it's the classic Starbucks coffee type of thing, and all of a sudden it's $6 for a coffee where you could have done that some other way. We don't care if you buy a $6 Starbucks. That doesn't matter. But what does matter is that that particular purchase brings you quality of life to the point of sacrificing something else that might be important to you. So putting yourself first and saving money for yourself to give you stability and security is one of the very best investments you can make in yourself. And getting
Hmm.
to the point of where you're willing to make that sacrifice is one of the most critically important aspects of financial planning, because it's not us telling you what you should or should not do. It's you deciding that this is important enough for me that I'm willing to sacrifice something else in my life in order to have greater stability and security.
And one thing I love about the book is that you're not just writing as a talking head. You are actually putting your life on the pages of these books, of the book. And so you give the example of how you and your wife were on one income. And it took you some time to be able to build up your emergency reserves, but you did. Tell us about that.
Well, when one of our things that we talked about when we first got married is when we ultimately decided to have kids, my wife, her values and priorities were she wanted to stay home and raise those kids. And she was a professional engineer. So that choice of leaving the engineering world with a good salary and benefits and all of those things, that was, it could be a very difficult decision for a lot of families. for us, again, this goes back to sacrifice. We looked at it and we said, okay, can we live what we deem to be a decent quality of life on one income? Well, we had always lived on one income. For that specific reason, we were planning ahead, knowing full well that she was going to make that choice at some point. And so by living on one income, that allowed us to accumulate a significant emergency reserve prior to us having our first child. And then when that happened, my wife stopped working, our income went down to one income. We had to stop saving for almost everything. Like I stopped saving into my retirement plan. We had our emergency reserves ahead of time. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
like we were aggressively saving any more for our emergency reserves. We were just getting by. We were paying for, food and shelter and clothes and the core necessities. We didn't have a lot of extra to go around. And that's okay because we had prioritized the saving for our emergency reserve ahead of time. Now, then my income started to rise a little bit, and maybe we would take a trip or maybe we'd do something else or we needed to buy a vehicle and we would eat away at that reserve. We would then come back and prioritize, okay, now we have to sacrifice somewhere else to create the money in order to build back up our reserves. And when you get into a habit of doing that, what happens is you start to prioritize delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And delayed gratification is missing from a lot of relationships in today's world. It's like, I want to do this now, so I do it now, and then I pay for it later. Well, it should be the exact opposite. I want to do this, it's important to me. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save and accumulate for that thing. Now I eventually have the money to do it. Now I do the thing. Maybe I even put it on a credit card or whatever, but I have the money saved. So now I pay for it. And that becomes a very responsible, accountable way of living. You're creating the habit of delayed gratification, and you tend to feel much better about that purchase or that activity or whatever it is that you're doing, rather than always living your life in guilt that I did the thing just because I
Mm-hmm.
knew it would make me feel better in the moment. And then later on, I paid for it and I knew that I spent an extra $1,000 of interest to pay for something that I did prioritize, but now I just made it dramatically more expensive.
Yeah. So one thing that's top of mind for a lot of people is how much is enough when it comes to your emergency reserve.
Well, I can tell you for human beings in general, it is human nature that we would always prefer to have more.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see these guidelines, you should have 3 months of expenses, 6 months of expenses, a year worth of expenses. I can tell you that for somebody who is committed to saving and accumulating an emergency reserve, you would always rather have more. Now, that being said, start somewhere. And so
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, what I can tell them is, maybe they have a couple $1,000s in checking and savings. They're living mostly paycheck to paycheck. And if they did suffer any sort of a serious life event, they're probably going to go into debt in order to be able to get through that period. So for most of those people, what I tell them is a great goal is to try to get to 3 months worth of core expenses. Now, core
Mm-hmm.
expenses means if I lost my job and I had to strip down my lifestyle to the core, so I maybe have to pay for my rent or my mortgage, I have to pay my car payment, I have to make sure that I have food, the basic core necessities, whatever that number is for you, getting to a goal of 3 months worth of core expenses is a great first step. Now, for a lot of people that we help, that'll end up being somewhere in like the $10,000 range. They might get to 10 or $15,000, and that gives them a great target to shoot for. People love to have a target to shoot for. You try to get 10,000 steps in a day, you have a target to shoot for. Is 10,000 the actual right number? No, 10,000 is not the right number. It's a number. And so
Mm-hmm.
starting with a number in mind, and then you get there. Now, what do you do when you get there? Well, the first thing is you can celebrate that you got there. That's fine. But the second thing is you will probably want more, and that's completely
Mhm.
okay. So you'll continue to save and accumulate. Now, the reason why you do that is eventually you have this $2,000 expense and you go from 10,000 down to 8,000. Well, what if you were at 12,000? Now you went down to 10,000. You're like, okay, I still have a decent emergency reserve. I once had a person I worked with, and she came in and she had worked very hard to save and accumulate her emergency reserve. She was very proud of herself to getting to $10,000. But when she came in, she had $2,000 on her credit card. And I said, well, why aren't you paying off your credit card? And she
Mhm.
goes, well, you told me I needed $10,000 in my emergency reserves, and I had an emergency. I didn't want to go below $10,000. And so I put it on the credit card. And I'm like, whoa, 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 you took this way too literally. The
Mhm.
10,000 is your emergency reserve. You should put it on the
Mhm.
credit card, which is fine. But then when the bill came due, pay it off. Yes, now you're down to 8,000, but pay yourself back to get yourself back to 10 grand. Now you have a defined goal and you're doing it as efficiently as you possibly can.
Now, you and your wife chose to take a specific approach to doing this. So you split reserves between your checking, savings, and an investment account. Why don't you tell us why you chose to do it that way and if that's something that makes sense for most people? I know everybody's situation is unique.
In general, your checking is really just your day to day, paychecks come in, you've got bills every day. Your checking is going to be a pass through to some extent of, just managing your day to day finances. So you might have 1 month worth of core expenses just sitting in your checking, and that just fluctuates up and down. I get a paycheck, I pay some bills. I get a paycheck, I pay some bills. Okay. That's not your emergency reserve per se. The savings account is your emergency reserve. So you might set up a high yield savings account, and now you start to accumulate this cash, and your high yield savings account is the next layer. And that is really for any expenses that you know you're going to have within the next year. So I know I'm going to have to buy tires for my car. I know that it's $1,000. I want that money in my high yield savings account until I make that expenditure. And then that's where that's going to stay. Now, this is also where maybe your 10 grand or like your 3 months worth of expenses, it's going to be in your high yield savings account. We don't want that money to fluctuate with the stock market or with investments or whatever happens to be. Now, if I continue to save beyond that, so for us, I had a very like uncertain income. I was a business owner. My income varied all over the place. So when you have a highly variable income, these might be salespeople. This might be people who their job just doesn't have a lot of security for whatever reason. I wanted to have 1 year worth of emergency reserves just to give us greater security. But I don't need all of that to just sit in savings. And
Mhm.
so the next layer was to set up a brokerage account and have investments where, yes, this is like my spillover. And as I get over my original emergency reserve goal, now I start to save into investments and hopefully earn a higher interest rate rather than what I was getting on my savings. Now, that money's still liquid, that money's still available. If I need it, I can transfer it back in, but it's layers of saving and accumulating that give us this ultimate goal.
Got it. So, what qualifies as a good use of the emergency reserve? So, I know you talked about paying off debt. You gave a scenario of a job layoff. Is there anything else that you may say, no, cash flow that instead of taking it from your emergency reserve?
Yeah, that's a harder question because, for a lot of people in today's world, the idea of what constitutes an emergency is,
Mhm.
hey, my iPhone broke, and I need a brand new iPhone and it's going to be $1,000. They're going to probably put that priority ahead of almost anything else, to be honest, in today's
Mhm.
world. I look at these things as being, core quality of life contributors. This is where you start getting down to needs rather than wants.
Yeah.
So a want gets into, hey, I need a mental health day or something, and I'm going to go to the spa, or I'm going to take a long vacation or a long weekend vacation type of thing just because I want to. But, I'm going to consider it emergency because, boy, I really feel like I need that weekend. Well, okay, that might be true depending on what you're going through, but yet at the same time, needs are definitely different than wants. And in today's world, that line between the two has become very blurred. And a
Mhm.
lot of what people consider needs today, I mean, the needs of my kids compared to the needs of what I was, at their age, two completely different things. I mean, they think Netflix would be a need rather than a want. And so everybody is going to be a little bit different here, but really what emergency reserves are for is something that directly impacts your ability to maintain quality of life like for the next day or the next month. So my car breaks down, I can't get to work. That is clearly an emergency. I need to get my car fixed so that I can continue to earn a living. My
Mhm.
house, if my refrigerator breaks down, I have to replace my refrigerator. It's an essential type of thing. And so those are really the emergencies we're talking about where now you pay for it with that credit card or whatever, and then you pay it off when it comes due.
Well, thank you for clarifying that for us. Is there any last tidbits you would like to share pertaining to emergency reserve?
Talking about saving money is really not exactly the sexiest topic of financial planning. Most people want to talk about should I buy Bitcoin or,
Mhm.
should I max out my 401k or whatever it happens to be. But realistically, I can tell you for a lot of the nurses we help in particular, if they have cash and then they have no consumer debt, so they don't have credit cards and things like that. They might have a mortgage, but they don't have, just consumer debt. It is such a good feeling to know
Mhm.
that you have that stability, that security. You hear young people talk about adulting, and
Mhm.
one of the core things about adulting, as far as I'm concerned, is being able to pay for something bad that happens in your life. And that means having an emergency reserve. And the people who have that feel much more responsible,
Mhm.
accountable. You you're in a much better place in your life. And so I encourage people that these core elements, these foundational elements of the book where I talk about like getting to an emergency reserve, they really are the most important aspect of your finances.
Yes, they are. That's that foundational piece. Thank you so much for sharing all that you have. If anyone is interested in reading Financial Success for the Rest of Us, you can check out the link in the description box below. Thank you. And until next time, have a good one.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.